JonBenet Ramsey case. White privilege. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey dialed 911 to report her daughter missing, and a ransom note was found. At approximately 6 a.m., the Boulder police arrived at their house, and the police officer spoke to John Ramsey, and he owned a small computer software business. John told the police officer that his son Burke was in bed asleep upstairs, and would you please not wake him? And the police officer responded, absolutely. And then John Ramsey showed the police officer the ransom note that his wife Patsy found on the back stairs. And it asked for a $118,000 ransom, which seemed just about right. And it stated, "We represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. The two gentlemen do not particularly like you. You are not the only fat cat around. And victory, SBTC." So it seemed like the ransom note picked John out kind of randomly, that maybe they would move on to another fat cat if John didn't follow the instructions. And then John's friend, John Fernie, arrived at the house. And then another couple, the Whites, arrived at the Ramsey's house. And then Father Roll arrived at the house. And then at 7:13 a.m., John Ramsey woke up Burke and led him outside to Mr. White's car to be taken over to Mr. White's house. And the police officer asked John if Burke knew anything, and John said no, he was asleep the whole time, and so he doesn't know anything. He didn't hear anything. After Burke left, the police asked John Ramsey and his friends if there was anything odd or unusual or anything they noticed in the ransom note. And John wouldn't answer or say anything, but his friends said it looks like the person knows about John and his life, that the $118,000 ransom seemed like a low amount, and they offered other thoughts about the ransom. After the 10 a.m. deadline of the ransom call, John Ramsey didn't seem concerned or ask any questions. As a matter of fact, later, the detective noticed him going through his mail and reading his mail. Then they lost track of him, and then later they noticed John nervous and agitated. And so the detective told him to go look around and see if he noticed anything unusual or odd. So John went with his friend down to the basement, and then the detective heard a scream, and then his friend run upstairs, called 911, and then John came up carrying his dead daughter's body, and he put her down on the floor. And then the detective bent down to check and see if his daughter, JonBenet, was alive. And then John looked at the detective and said, "Is she dead?" And the detective smelt an odor of decay and knew that JonBenet had been dead for hours and hours. And then a wave of fear went over the detective when she was looking straight at John, thinking, he killed her. Multiple police personnel arrived at John Ramsey's house, and another detective heard John on the phone arranging to get a flight to Atlanta that afternoon. And then 2 more people arrived at the house, John's older children from a previous marriage. And John asked the police officer in charge if he could go stay with his friend. And the police officer said, absolutely. Later that night, 2 detectives went over to John's friend's house to speak to John and Patsy, and John told them that Patsy was too distraught and couldn't talk. And the detectives asked for John and Patsy to go down to the police station. And then a friend of John spoke up and said that he was an attorney and he's representing John, and he won't be coming down to the police station or talking. A couple days later, John Ramsey asked the police to release the body so they could do the funeral. And the police said they're still working on their investigation. And then later that night, John Ramsey's friend at the district attorney's office told the police, you can't be ransoming the body for an interview. You have to release the body. And then the body was released to the Ramsey family. And then a few days later, John Ramsey, through his attorneys, said the only way that they will do an interview is together at a neutral location. Otherwise, they're not going to do any interviews. After their daughter was buried, John and Patsy Ramsey went on CNN and told the CNN reporter that there's a child murderer out loose on the streets of Boulder. Why did the Boulder police believe the ransom note? Why didn't the police look for JonBenet? No search team, no search dogs, no getting volunteers. Even Officer Rick French went down to the basement, went right to that door that JonBenet's dead body was behind, and he didn't enter because he was looking for an intruder. He wasn't looking for JonBenet. Now, going back and looking at this in the present, in their present at that time, there were signs something isn't right. John and Patsy Ramsey's Reverend has arrived. John and Patsy's friends are arriving in the 6 o'clock hour. It's still dark outside. Burke is asleep like a baby, undisturbed in his bedroom. Neither John or Patsy is looking for or asking about JonBenet. And just a writing tip, it's much easier just to write in the past. And finally, really, a foreign faction has kidnapped JonBenet? Is that believable? That's not even questionable? So when did the believability of the ransom note end? Well, Father Roll would tell you when she was found dead, when her body was still in the house, when JonBenet was snatched from the house without a sound. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't fight off her attacker, nothing. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and tomorrow night we'll have a new episode about the Zodiac Killer case, about who killed Sherry Jo Bates, and I believe I know who killed her. So I'll see you the next time.